afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented by the IFMA IT community. We are ecstatic that you guys are here, and we want to make sure that you are able to connect with the IT community at any time. You will hear more about the IFMA group, but if you have your computers or if you have a piece of paper, jot down the website it.ifma.org so that you can get connected with the IT community after this presentation. First, we have our chair, Ted Ritter, who will do an intro and tell us a little bit about why we are here. But at the current time, you are in listen-only mode, and this webinar is being recorded. During the webinar, should you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to type them in the chat or questions box. We will address them all at the end of the webinar. You're in for a great presentation, so get ready to hear some great information that you can use and take back to your facilities. Ted, take it away.
Thank you much. Next slide, please. So appreciate everybody joining us today. Next slide would be, there we go. Yeah, a little bit about the IT community. I think, we want to collaborate and share best practice case studies. We ask one question a lot of different ways, which is how does technology support facility management and infrastructure management? We're committed to providing appropriate and relevant content to the global IFMA and RSIC membership, utilizing a broad range of communication and publication platforms. Next slide, please. Always need to thank our sponsors. We've got, I think, a great sponsorship program this year, and we do have a percentage of our sponsorships revenue going to the foundation, which we'll do a little presentation a week after next at World Workplace with that. We also collaborate closely with other components, special events, BIM conference, regional gatherings in Dallas, Los Angeles, Phoenix. So thanks again to our sponsors. If you're interested in sponsoring, you can get in touch with April or contact me directly. Next slide, please. So always like to spend a few minutes on, really what's the importance of IFMA communities and council and what's the difference. Communities are really aligned with our core competencies. So, obviously we're with the technology community, but if you need help with business leadership, it definitely goes across, all the components, all the membership, sustainability, strong, growing operation maintenance and health safety, real estate advisory and leadership. If you, don't manage construction projects too often, they can be a great resource for you. And of course, workplace evolutionaries that I think are by far our largest communities. Councils are aligned with vertical markets, so think of it as like birds of a feather flocking together. If you happen to manage, manufacturing facility and you'd like to be able to benchmark and talk to people that managed similar like kind of facilities, that might be a good fit. The Airport Facilities Council, Utilities Council, we've collaborated with in the last 6 months and done some joint promotion communication. But if you have not aligned with community or council, I strongly recommend it. It's about the price of a good lunch to add that membership and get that additional value for each year. Next slide, please. So World Workplace is coming up week after next. Looking forward to that. One of the things that we'd like to do a shout out on is the Facility Manager's Guide for Information Technology. We are in our second edition. We co-authored this with about 26 authors between North America, Europe, and Asia. It's really a good read, and the upgraded or renewed version has, I think, 18 new case studies in the appendix, and we'll be giving away a couple copies and have some available for autographing at World Workplace in Charlotte. Next slide, please. Really looking forward to today's webinar. I think April put it well. I think this is going to be a great presentation. I really like the preview. BIM for FM, Design and Construction Project Team's Perspective. Definitely pay attention to this one. Next slide, please. We'll do a little introduction. So, AJ Bridwell, BIM data expert and strategist, 20+ years in the construction realm for owners. Last 7 years focused on technology for BIM to FM, which is something we really need to pay attention to. Carl Gudio, VDC manager, with Hensel Phelps, 15 years in design with Fentress Architects and FRCH Design, 5 years in a construction group with Hensel Phelps. At this point, I think I will turn it over to presenters. I'm really looking forward to today's session.
Hello, everyone. This is Carl Gooddeal, and
this is AJ Bridwell.
How are you? And just first of all, before we proceed, just want to thank everybody for taking their time out and joining us for this presentation. Welcome. Hopefully we can share some information that you don't know and you can take back to your projects. So as was said, I'm Carl Gooddeal, VDC Manager with Hensel Phelps, and I am proof that aliens do exist. And AJ, I think he said he's just a regular human being.
Yep, just regular human.
Just a regular human. Just to give you a little insight into what we're going to be going over today. We're going to start with a couple poll questions just to get a feel for what the audience makeup is and your experience or exposure is to BIM. Then we'll talk about specifically the AEC, or the Architectural Engineering and Construction perspective on BIM and FM, and then some of the challenges that we're dealing with from a BIM workflow, and how we've overcome a lot of those and generated some interest into the facilities maintenance, facilities management data flows. We're going to go show an example of some better ways that we are now achieving this through those lessons learned, and hopefully leave you with some takeaways and some time for Q&A. So right now we'll start with a poll, but probably not the Festivus poll or the unadorned poll that I tend to think of, coming up on this time of year, but we'll actually ask you a few questions on BIM. So we can start the poll now. Is that coming across?
The poll has been launched. You'll see the first question of 3 available right now. So we'll give everyone a couple of moments to complete it. Looks like we've got 91%. So about 2 more seconds and then we'll launch the next one. Okay, looks like we have question 2 up. How many of you have been involved in BIM to FM delivery process? Either some of you have, some of you have not. Looks like we're getting about a 50-50 result, and most of you have voted. So we'll give this a couple of seconds more, and then our final question will populate. Okay, and the final question is now live. For those who were involved, please rate the success of that process, 1 being poor and 5 being amazingly awesome. And then everything in between is 2 to 4.
Right.
Okay. Looks like we've got a few awesomes there.
Oh, nice.
Great.
Yeah.
Amazing. About 33% is close to poor, half and half for the mid section, 3 and 4, and 17% awesome. Thank you guys for voting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good statistics. Really good statistics.
All right. So as I said, we'll start off with a little, for those of you who either have a more of a operations and management perspective on BIM, give you a little bit of a history of how the architectural engineering and construction industries have utilized BIM for their workflows. So we will start with the BIM, which like it or not, has been sort of morphed into 2 different terms. It's building information model and modeling. So one is the actual model itself, and one is actually a process. And we started getting into this realm, and when I say we, I mean the design and construction industry started getting into this realm probably about 18, 20 years ago for the most part, and was widely accepted really right away for the use of the model itself. That was the easiest, sort of lowest hanging fruit that we could achieve, was just looking at the model, looking at the project, developing renderings and whatnot. So we actually, the BIM at that time was defined as the model, but over the years, this really morphed into more of a process and has been used sort of in conjunction with that terminology and getting things done. And so from an architectural perspective, you can see over on the right, we utilized the model really to assist us with documentation. And so as we built the 3D model, we were automatically generating our plans, our elevations, sections, details, estimates based on the schedules of the quantities of content that we were placing into the model. So it really started to blossom from using just the model for visualization into actual usable data and usable content. From a construction perspective, we absolutely used it from a visualization where we are brought in by clients early and often and to sort of investigate projects that they want to build. This was a project we actually did with Lockheed Martin a number of years ago, and before we even had designers and trades on board, we were doing massing studies with the owner to try to establish some programming and how we were going to lay out the project in an existing facility. So, but really where the rubber hits the road for contractors was utilizing that model and the information we were gathering from it to do things like analyzing, you know, the plans for traffic patterns on construction sites, showing the government facility or government agencies who were responsible, you know, for those roads that we were only closing off certain roads at certain times. You know, we would lay out equipment as well as supplies that were being delivered and where we were placing them and where we were scheduling manpower and other trades who were on site and where they would potentially park or store their equipment. Those were kind of the big gets from the construction perspective. So from BIM, we went into BAM, and that's the building assembly model. From a construction perspective, these were big wins where we could do prefabricated and delivered on-site components of the structure. The biggest low-hanging fruit, obviously, that everybody uses now is doing spatial coordination, where we would get all of the trade models, the design models together and start to analyze how each of them were filling the space and therefore hopefully not hitting each other or interacting with each other. And we then use that same information to install that equipment or those systems properly. So we went from BIM to BAM, and then we actually circled back and did the BAM with a little a for an analytical model. And from the amount of information we were collecting from the two previous processes, we were able to start really informing design and informing construction methods because we were getting this information so early in the process. So we could do this before even design started and start to analyze the model for, you know, this was a study that we did for light inclusion and sun impacts on the design and how far the sun was going into the building. We used it with some other software for doing estimating and quantity takeoffs. And then from a construction perspective, you know, we typically don't get this level of detail from our designers. These were our follow the water details. So we were able to start utilizing some of this information to inform how buildings were getting built and therefore informing really the designers that, you know, sort of as a give and take back and forth. We said, you know, for constructability purposes, we would ask them to adjust their design to meet some better detailing that would ensure that the performance of the building was the greatest it possibly could be. So finally, from a construction perspective, we were also using laser scanning. And much like, we look at this as science fiction, this image coming from the movie Prometheus, but this is almost exactly what we're dealing with from a drone perspective when we fly drones around the site. We actually attach cameras to that, do photogrammetry, and are able to generate point clouds of existing conditions. It's amazing how sort of now life imitates art to this degree. So we've now come, sorry, I was one slide ahead. Part of the big gets that we had here were scheduling. So we actually utilized the model to go over projects and show them exactly how we were going to build and produce their project. This was a project that we went after for the Smithsonian, where we had to display how we were going to protect the Smithsonian assets while replacing the entire roof and mechanical system of the building. So we showed them exactly what we were going to do with the support systems and how we were going to protect those assets. And you saw that plane back here. So these were some of the big gets that we were able to achieve through BIM. And so let me proceed here. So now we've gone from essentially BIM to BAM, back to up to BAM with the analytical model, and finally now we're in BOOM. And when you put it all together, unfortunately I'm a child of the 80s, so it just reminds me of one of my favorite CDs as a kid is the Big Bam Boom, but it's Bam 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 Boom. You'll hear that from some VDC and BIM people around the industry, but now we're into BOOM, the operations and optimization model, where we have taken now all of these assets, all of these tools from the previous examples, and we are now able to offer that data in a structured system back to the owners and operators of buildings at the end of our construction process. So this includes that we can offer information to you regarding asset management, space management, disaster planning, preventive maintenance tasks, work orders, and work order management. We can input a lot of that information ahead of time for input into your CMMS when we hand the project over. And the big lesson here is we want you guys to get involved at the beginning of the process. We want to include the facilities managers, the facilities operators immediately or as soon as possible. And so we'll go over some of those challenges here next. So we've got our AEC industry challenges, and so right now we've got the final project delivery, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen rooms like this when you are given your project to run. Here is your handover. You're welcome from the contractor. There is a lot of information here that you have to sort through and get through, and there are unfortunately, a lot of data drops that may occur here. And AJ, you want to talk about some of those?
Yeah. So from our perspective and Bakara's perspective, where Carl's on the build side, right, with Hensel Phelps, us on my side, we're really focused on the data, and we work with the owners more so to circumvent what you're seeing in this image. And the goal there is to really kind of focus on making that BIM, the BIM that we're talking about, making that kind of everything, if not close to everything that's in these boxes that you see here in this image, be hosted and digitally delivered to you as the facility owner or the operator. And this is a doable task. It's achievable. It's something that is happening now in the industry in a lot of places, both here in the States and overseas. But it takes planning. Just as Carl said, the goal is to get the facilities people involved as early as possible, understand what the needs are, and then translate that over into what we call as a BIM execution plan, which we'll cover later. But really the goal is to make that digital transition happen. So we at Embakara, we have this term called next day readiness. And the premise there is that when you get the facility, the day you get it, your FM systems should be spun up and active, right? Because as you know, as many of you people on the call or listening will understand, getting an FM, getting your CAFM, getting your CMMS, getting those systems spun up can take months, and months. And there's risk in that. There's risk that your facility is running, you're kind of running blind, right? And so hopefully what we'll talk about today will convince you guys that this is a digital process, or a process that can be done digitally, and is something that we're doing in the industry. So yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Indeed. And then we just wanted to convey to you that essentially we're here right now to try to convince you that this does not have to be the end result. We have tools in place, as AJ was saying, that will assist you getting to that, or actually help us get to the finish line and give you what you desire at the end of the day, and avoid essentially the massive data drop that it comes from the time from construction to operations. So this is something that we've been working on within the design and construction realm, and are ready to transfer this over to the operations side. So what you're seeing here essentially is the old school way, where we would have multiple deliveries through design, and this design team contractually typically would be separate from the construction team. And we would bring on the construction team and pretty much start from scratch, and we'd have this information gap that we would have to span, where all of the construction team, the GC, the trades, engineers who were brought on after design, have to sort of relearn what the designers already knew at the end of their process. And then we would finally start to gain ground. And at construction, I think you guys will all agree that you experience the same data drop and data gap, where you're having to basically relearn the building itself. Even after commissioning and training, there's still so much to discover. So our ideal is this includes operations, but we want to get trade partners, engineers, designers, constructors, all on the team as early as possible to avoid all of these information gaps and drops and significant amount of waste. And at the end of the day, it essentially will, we hope, and I think it's been proven in a number of cases where we've used these methods, that you have a better building, you're performing more effectively, and your team, the operations team, is ready to go from day one. And so we're trying to create this knowledge transfer machine. We're trying to get all that information that we're producing and collecting during design and construction into your hands on day one of operations. So one of the reasons that BIM helps us do this is that because of, as I showed you, all that information that we're collecting ahead of time and we're producing, that means decisions are being made significantly early in the process. You know, it used to be essentially that the ability to influence a project would drop over time until we hit operations. The cost of creating any changes or making any changes would obviously exponentially go up through construction and operations. The traditional method, because of how slow and plodding that process was, as well as how we weren't teamed as effectively with all of the design and trade partners and operations partners, the amount of ability for us to influence the design and the end result of the project was shifted was significantly to the right, and ended up therefore costing a lot more. Uh-oh. Are you guys reading me?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I'm frozen, unfortunately. So let me see if I can keep talking to this point. while my computer resets here. I'm sorry.
It's the bim bam. It's the bim bam boom, man. Too much boom.
Right. So essentially with BIM allowed us to move that decision point to the left. So we were making decisions earlier and earlier in the process. And we call this sort of building the project with bits before we're building it with bricks. So it's really inexpensive to construct a project, obviously virtually within the authoring software and those tools, as opposed to making changes out in the field. So we're doing whatever we can to avoid that. And I'm going to try to, I apologize, everyone. My PowerPoint has frozen. Wow, this is unfortunate. I am really sorry. Let me see if, oh, I might be up now. There we go.
Yep.
Starting again. Okay, apologize that for the hiccup, guys.
Too much boom. It was overloading your buffer.
Too much boom, that's for sure. The boom came down. So our traditional contract methods that sort of were reflected in that first, arch of the traditional method, our contracts were made in such a way to almost create an antagonistic feel between the design team, the construction team, and then basically left you guys almost high and dry, where we would deliver that room of data to you and sort of wipe our hands and walk away. What we have found that is significantly works better is to have much more of a construction design operation team who work together and are able to efficiently provide and share information, be open about all of the content that we either desire and can deliver to each other. So the designers, or construction and operations support design at the beginning of the project. Design supports construction and operations, during construction and operations. We're here to give you as much data as we can during your process takeover and assist you in achieving the building that you really want to run. So one of the other hurdles, aside from contract written language, was really the culture within the AEC community. Adopting BIM, we saw this, 15 years ago, where the culture was really geared toward the traditional method. I've always done it that way. Oh, BIM is just that new shiny object out there. I don't have time to do this. And we're sort of seeing similar conversations when we talk about obtaining, collecting, and handing over facilities management data. We've never done that. I don't know how, it's not in my scope. And really what we're doing as the GC is training our internal staff as well as our trade partners that, look, the data is the same that we've always delivered, but we're simply acquiring it in a new way. It's not extra effort, it's just different. And that's part of the tools that AJ alluded to earlier, is like, we've got tools in place now where we can, provide this information to the owner in a better way. So, AJ, do you want to talk a little bit about the owner's data comment here?
Yeah. So again, just as Carl was saying, this BIM stuff, it's been around a long time. So none of this is new, and there are owners in the industry that are fully taking advantage of this process. And BIM is, just as Carl said, it is a process. It's not a technology. It's not a software. BIM is a process. But there are owners who are fully leveraging this, and they are getting the maximum benefit out of what we're discussing here. But there's gotchas. You've got to approach this in a smart way. So again, from our side, the Invocara side, this is where we work with the owners a lot, where we get to understand, what do you need? what are you currently, or how are you currently tracking or managing your facilities? What are the assets that are inside your facilities that are pertinent to you, and how do you manage them, right? And then what are the properties or the values inside those assets that are also likewise needed for your teams to be able to manage those assets at the optimum? One thing that we always see is, are you literally managing, are you getting down to the kitchen sink level? In some cases, yeah, there are instances and facility types where, understanding and knowing, the kitchen sink in each unit, if it's a high-rise multifamily building, they do track that because they got to worry about those things. If it's a big warehouse, the kitchen area is not quite as important, right? So you switch gears to larger assets, larger big ticket assets. So it's really about understanding how your teams work and manage the facilities, and you've got to marry your approach to this BIM stuff, inheriting or pulling this BIM stuff into your CAFM or however you manage your facility. You've got to closely mirror that. So in other words, don't ask for everything in the world if you don't use or don't need everything in the world. So it's scalable. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, and that's basically what my notes here from the architectural engineering construction side, those teams are involved in is really both training the owners and having them guide us as well as us guide them into finding that butter zone, that Goldilocks area of what is just right for that project, because I think AJ, you alluded to this a little bit, was that they see what this can do and they start asking for everything. The owners and operators start asking for everything because they're just, oh my gosh, this is amazing stuff. And we have to be a little more conservative about how we approach these things, because the truth at the end of the day is you probably won't use all of the data that we can provide you. And we want to make sure that we're overcoming these hurdles from internally as well, as opposed to just sort of sitting with the owner and finding out their needs and really getting a realistic expectation, but also instructing, like I said previously, instructing our trade partners to say, look, this is not that much more of an effort. We can provide this to them. We just have to do it slightly differently than we're used to. And if we get those requirements at the beginning of the project, it is significantly cheaper for us as the GC to buy out the trades with that data, as opposed to coming in at the end of the project and asking for them that. So there's one lesson learned. I have one project where this is what got me involved in this process. Probably about 5-6 years ago, we were asked to deliver facilities management data to an owner, but they really only requested about halfway through construction. So we were pretty much almost done with the project, and they started to give hints as to, oh, hey, it'd be nice if we could have this. And for them, they had a requirement also that it wasn't just data that we were delivering to them, it was in a specific delivery method, which for them, they wanted it in the authoring software, which for that project was Revit. What ended up happening is you can see some of the hurdles that we overcame there, which was the MEP trades abandoned their Revit model halfway through documentation. This is when this trade was just starting to take up Revit as one of their BIM tools, and they were not confident in getting their construction documents out and in a timely manner, so they downshifted back to AutoCAD. And now here's the owner saying, well, we want everything that's current and we want it in Revit. I was brought in as the Revit geek, the resident Revit geek for Hensel Phelps, and they handed me this sort of halfway done model and said, okay, now match this with the construction documents and all the components that are in the model that deal with, and MEP systems that we want to track and use for facilities management and do preventive maintenance work on. And thankfully, they were specific in what they were looking for. So I was able to essentially just surgically go in and update that model, update the schedules and the components within that project and give them what they want. But on the flip side of that, it took me almost about a year and a half to achieve that goal, because practically all the trades and designers were off the project by the time I got involved. And I had one lone Hensel Phelps employee on the project who could help me acquire that information so that I could get it into the model. Now, overall, it took me probably about 2 months of real, day-to-day work, but those 2 months were spread out over a year and a half because it took us that much time to get it back up to speed. So again, earlier information is the better. And from that point on, I decided I will never do a project like that again. I'm going to get the owner on board from day one and start asking these questions. So now we have a better way. And we do this essentially in summary with a series of questions that we ask the project owners and the project manager, or the facilities managers for that project. They're the who, what, when, why, and how of how we do data exchange from design and construction into operations. And we're going to cover each of these, and we've sort of hinted at them throughout our beginning of our presentation, but now we'll go a little more into detail as to ideally what we should be looking at and trying to gather from you folk. We do have systems in place that we adapted very easily from our Hensel Phelps project management 6-step plan of work into our data acquisition and delivery for facilities management. And this is obviously just an outline of our steps and procedures, but essentially, if I could even boil it down more, it's really acquisition of data, analysis of data, and application of that data. But first we ask, what are your uses? Why do you need this information? And it's not from an antagonistic perspective that we don't want to deliver to you, but we want to understand how you're going to use it so we know what and how to deliver it, what to deliver to you and how to deliver it to you. So is it for preventive maintenance work? Is it just for work order planning, space planning, et cetera? All of the above. We have to understand why you need it so that we can better offer you the right format and uses for it. So we have tools in place that we hand to you as a series of questionnaires and booklets for you to peruse to get familiar with uses that we can deliver from the model and from the construction process. And one of those big ones is the execution plan. This is where really we get the contractual obligation tied to the delivery of this information so that we can make sure that we hold our trades to exactly what you want. So after we define the uses, then we apply that into the BIM or VDC execution plan, and that is how we lock our trades into delivering that content that you have requested. So let's see here. Oops, there we go.
Yeah, so kind of just to back that up and what Carl was saying, is you need to start to think about internally who are the key team people that need to be involved in these discussions, right? So from our perspective at Invocara, where we do this is what we do day in, day out constantly as a company, is focus on this. This is our swag at kind of how to approach this. The A team is your first group, and without these guys being involved, without these people being involved, you're really setting the process up for a little bit of a tilt up, a fail. You have to have the data director for your your organization's CAFM or CMMS or FM, or if you don't necessarily, or if you don't have a in-place CAFM, whatever you're using to manage your facility, someone is kind of the keeper of that knowledge. Someone inside your organization understands the inner workings of that system. And of course, the facility management director, and when I say director here, I'm talking about the director and the team, right? So these are the people that are the wrench turners. They're the peeps that are on the floor, working on the facility, inspecting devices. It's a litany of services that fall under that. That's your A team. You get these people involved, then you're heading in the right direction. Your B team, this is where you start talking about ancillary uses of this BIM use data in a CAFM play. So this would be like your leasing and space management director. So in other words, if you've got a multi-use, multi-tenant facility, hospitals also is space management. A big concern with healthcare is around space management. That's your B team players. How do they need the data? How do they use the data? And that's really what you're asking is each of these teams is how do you use the data? What data are you exposed to today? Currently, what data do you think would be helpful to be, given if you had that option, if you could go beyond what you're getting today? What are the assets or the information formats that you require? Warehouse director, again, this depends on the type of management style or facility operation style you have. And then when you get down into the C team, this gets a bit particular. This is the type of facility. When you're talking about your janitorial services or your service provider, or even a site security director. And again, that goes back to what type of facility you're managing. But each of these teams, if you have them involved in your facility, it's critical to talk to them if they access the management tools, because each of them have unique needs. Each of them have requirements. They might use different tools even than what your CAFM solution is. Again, those ancillary solutions can benefit from a BIM digital deliverable. It's just, how do they need that data primed, and in what format do they need the data? Next slide. So again, when you're going back into this, and you're talking to these people to kind of create that, the assets, the data, this whole process, when you're talking to the teams, the big thing that you always want to keep a very close eye on to is something that both myself and Carl has brought up before is scope creep. As indicated by the image, scope creep is bad, but we see it a lot where when you sit down at a table and you pull up the BIM, a sampling of the data from the BIM of their facility, right? When you see how much data is there, how complete the amount of information that can be accessed in this solution or in this process, it's hard not to go, well, wait a minute, we could also do this, and if we can do that, we can do this, and well, how about that? And then, I've always thought it'd be really cool. You gotta kind of baby step into this, right? You gotta keep within some framework of what you do today, what's scalable in the next fiscal year, maybe 2 fiscal years. How much extra data can you actually process? Because just as Carl will contest, if you start getting to where you are asking for everything plus the kitchen sink, there can be additional costs associated with that. Now, there are tools and processes that help mitigate that cost, because when you start to push back to the subs, just as Carl indicated, to ask them to start adding additional data or go in and do additional steps, typically there's some pushback, but there's tools that are on the market, such as our tool at Invocara, where it's an online collaboration BIM tool that is geared towards the owner, right? So it's an owner-focused solution. Those kind of tools make that not as a disruptive or a pain point for the subcontractors. But you do have to stay focused and not allow, you know, your hungry eyes at a buffet to get, you know, write a check that you just can't cash out on, right? Because you're gonna have some overlay of data. So
Yeah.
Carl.
And that's why, you know, the first step there was for the, you know, the use and defining the uses. And in order to try to avoid a lot of scope creep within the asset selection, you know, we've got those uses identified, and that helps us narrow this down. But, you know, it's interesting that there was a client who we delivered content for, and we were surprised at how small their asset list was, and specifically asked them, for example, about VAV boxes. And this was for an airport. And we said, well, we noticed that VAV boxes aren't in your list of assets that you want to collect information on. And they said, yeah, well, you know, I'm going to just throw a number out there. Let's say, you know, it costs us $5,000 to buy that VAV box. And if we follow the preventive maintenance log, you know, we're going to service that thing twice a year, check it, make sure it's running properly. The amount of manpower and time that we have to close down a gate, to go look at every single one of the boxes in a terminal that are, you know, 30 feet in the air, we're going to spend that $5,000 essentially in the first 6 months to a year. Well, the expected life of that piece of equipment is 5 years, so we're just going to let it run to fail. And because it's not in a high impact area, if one of them fails, nobody will notice it. We'll let it fail, go back, replace it. Job done, we won. You know, so that was kind of an eye opener for us as a GC. We thought they wanted to, anything that had a machine on it, anything that had to be serviced, they wanted within their facilities management data delivery. And they sort of surprised us and said, no, actually, because of that use, we don't care. So now on the flip side of that, we've had other clients who said, well, I want P-traps in our MEL, our master equipment list, for us to track and deliver information. And we sort of pushed back on that one and said, really, do you really need that much information? And so that's where some of that education, you know, from both sides comes from, and that partnering relationship that we prefer. We learn from each other and figure out what our needs are. So with that, we have tools that, like I said, you know, we have documents, questionnaires, tools that we each have, Invicar and Hensel Phelps both have, that we can offer our owners, partners, in order to, you know, whittle down that asset list and get it down to just that right number and just what is needed to fulfill your uses. So from there we go into attribute. So
yeah, and this again, you know, we talked previously. We were talking about the assets, you know, the physical assets that can visually be seen in the model, which have a graph, you know, have a real world physical element. Now we're talking about the attributes. These are the embedded additional properties that can be attached to those assets inside the BIM, right? And now one thing to remember is that a tool like Revit, which is a BIM tool, right, in essence, it is purpose-built for design and construction. So when you get into these instances where you know, you're actually having to add additional requirements or additional properties, the attributes, a lot of times that's not native to the content. That's inside the design tool. So some of these asks will be, you know, require assets or content in the models to be modified, right? So that's something to keep an eye on, and that's why you need to keep it kind of centric and not get too crazy. But it is completely customizable in these tools. You can really get in and create some very unique attribute requirements or attribute asset tables that are manageable both in the BIM solution and then again in a QA/QC process. And you want to align those over to the CAFM solution. So what you're looking at here is kind of a swag, again, from Invicar's perspective. these are kind of the best approaches to getting the asset data, the attributes. What we define as base data, this is going to set the primer, right? These are the bare minimum things you should be looking for in the BIM deliverable. So things like asset type, part number, installation date, manufacturer stuff. Then you get into a little more additional data, which is possible to ask for. Room location, warranty information, expected life, the maintenance frequency. Then you get into more of the exhaustive instances where you're really starting to ask for a lot of attribute and value data. But again, all of this is doable. You just have to keep in mind what you're doing today and what you're going to be doing the next 2 to 3 years, what you want to do with the data. Yep.
And so along those same lines, there's, we have tools that we offer the owners and work with the, AEC team and the owner team in order to establish what attributes are assigned to what assets and when they will be delivered. We'll get to that a little bit here in just a second, but that is also as important as defining what your needs are, but it's to the when. And if we didn't say it before, we'll say it again, that, watch that scope creep. It is like a kid in a candy store where you start seeing what this stuff can do. And we just, at some point, we have to draw the line in the sand and say, okay, we've already bought out the trades for this month. Next project will give you even more. So we just have to watch out for your interests and our interests as well as we're looking at this thing. So the fourth big ticket here is defining the standards. We ask that you please stick with a known standard. It helps everybody in the end, because if you use master format, OmniClass uniformat, one of those standards, our design and construction industry is prepared to offer it that way and easy enough. But we do have what we call Babel fishes or translators that assist us in getting that information from our authoring software into your CAFM system, whatever it may be. There is usually a way, and that way usually at the very least common denominator is an Excel sheet. So we'll get it to you somehow, but if you can, try to keep your standards within the industry standard, within industry accepted standards, and don't try to reinvent the wheel. For our fifth area, we need to know and define expected values. The attributes are great, but what are you expecting to see there? Is it a dollar value? Is it a date? Is the date with dashes or slashes? What can your CAFM system accept? And at some point it becomes, you say fried green tomatoes, I see Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And, we could be talking the same things, but very differently. So the idea here being that, for spaces, and identifying them, do you say level 1, level 01, first level, first floor? We go through this process with our clients and identify what you really want as an expected value. So finally, we get to who should provide the data. And our argument is that whoever is responsible for the data, that's who should be providing that data. So if it's an electrician, they're the ones who are going to fill out the information and deliver it to the final delivery. They themselves will provide that information, and we will just manage that process and make sure that it's clean and meets the standards. And that kind of comes into our define when the data will be required. And we go back to that spreadsheet where these are equivalent to delivery dates throughout the life of the construction and design and construction process. And then we get to the, defining when data will be acquired and QC'd. So.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about here is establishing predefined QA QC stages that happen in a project, and you want to marry those to traditional process that are common inside of a project. So inside of projects, you have milestones. Now, early in your project, you're going to have where you want to kind of keep a focus on just the assets. So the assets that I'm interested in, are they there? Do the assets have the properties or the attributes available? You're not even worried about checking if the assets or the property values match. Then when you get into mid-stage, this is when you're starting to look into additional properties. You're starting to actually consider LOD, right? And extended data about the assets. And then finally, the later stages of the project, again, mirroring this to milestones, you're starting to get into some real key focused checking. And again, marrying that to milestones. Checking can be a nuisance. It can be a difficult process unless you're using, a digital way to do that. And again, that's why Hensel Phelps has partnered with Invicara on lots of their projects where they're using our online tool, which is really just a rules engine, to validate these steps and processes. So
yeah, we could not have achieved our the amount of work and effort to deliver this data without the BIM machine tool from Invicara, that's for sure. So our final question is, how will the data be delivered? Is it a COBie deliverable schema? Is it an Excel worksheet? Basically, and for some big ones out there like Maximo and Archibus, they have direct connections into authoring tools like Revit. Do you just want a simple Excel sheet that we export out? You want to organize by discipline, in the native authoring software, which is what that first example I gave was about. They wanted it in Revit. So we are approaching the end of our hour. So I have one example here of SFO where we utilize these processes. And we defined at the beginning of them, they had their uses was really just to essentially duplicate their equipment inventory form. They just wanted everything that was on that form to be delivered to them. But as their eyes were opened a little bit more, they said, oh goodness, we can do a whole lot more with this. And we started to get a little more sophisticated into, what we were requested from them, where we started, establishing, now you don't really need site barrier products and gates, in your use scenario. You don't need the hardware for the doors. You just need doors that are organized, that are mechanical and automated. Not everything was required. So we then went into our list and started, whittling down that asset type with their equipment inventory list. I'm sorry. We then went into their attributes, where originally they had the standard components right here, component attributes. And then they decided throughout the life of their process that they actually wanted it customized. That was a argument that I lost. I wanted to keep it as a default attribute list, but they wanted to customize it to their SFO underscore. And the reason being that they had a significantly more global perspective from their campus than just a single project. And they were headed down towards this standard anyway. So this is why we had to accommodate that. And so their standards, they went pretty much with a uniformat standard, although you can see here they equated it to the other ones as well. But that, again, the standard, I don't want to come across like we couldn't give them what they wanted with their attributes, but as long as they created a standard for us, we could match it. Expected values, we asked them, what do their dates look like? What do they expect for their room numbers, and what do they want their building name to be? So for like Terminal 1, this is what their expected value is going to be. So we established that. Who provided the data? Again, we go back to this who right here, and we organized all of those data fields and those attribute fields into specific trades and design partners. And then finally to, the when, or I shouldn't say finally, but we established based on our delivery schedule when those attributes were to be filled out. So with the who and the when, that gave us a really, solid delivery for them, and something then to check. So we utilized BIM Assure, Invicara's tool, to place all of those rules, all that information that we used, that I described right there, to input their models into the BIM Assure tool and do the checking to make sure we were getting quality data. So we were using their model checker, their analyses, and then we would generate reports from those analyses to give back to our trades to tell them how they were doing in terms of meeting those defined goals. And like I said earlier, we could not have achieved this many or that much QC without this tool. It was essentially a lifesaver. It took us from what I was estimating about 2 weeks worth of work down to what is now essentially a couple hours. So it was really beneficial. And then finally we get to the deliverable. You know, the SFO had specific requirements to have some content in Revit, most of it delivered within a COBie format, and we even offered them a simplified master equipment list to deliver there. So our big takeaways here, you know.
Yeah, so the big thing here is, I'll jump in real fast, is because I know we're a little past the hour, but the big thing is you know, getting you guys, the FM side, the owner side, getting you engaged on the projects. Carl said it a couple of times, I've said it a couple of times. Get you guys engaged early, as soon as possible, you guys and gals, because it's you know, really critical to get that kind of queued up early. Be specific when you're talking about a BIM execution plan. Don't leave ambiguity in your expectation documentation. I could list a ton of examples of where that's bitten people in the rear end. The big thing is always when you start dealing with building out a BIM execution plan or a BIM owner expectation plan, refer to a professional group. Hire Invicara. We're a consulting group. This is, like I said, this is what we do. One thing to make sure you steer clear from is, if you're going to write a plan, don't get on Google BIM to FM and then copy paste everything in one document. That's a fail. There's a litany of other, you know, life lessons that can be shared, but for brevity, I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Carl?
I just want to finish off that, you know, we want to be your partners. We want to deliver you the best possible product, obviously selfishly, so that you have a good feeling about what we've left you with and that your project is performing as expected. So, you know, get in early, ask about this information, follow those steps, and we'll be able to give you information that'll better serve your needs at the end of the day. So,
yep.
So yeah, that is it. And I'm sorry we went a little over, but
we get a little geeky about this and can talk forever, so apologies.
So are there any questions for anybody who's stuck around?
We don't have any questions, and since we're at time, we're going to provide the information of our presenters in the follow-up email. Tomorrow, you all will see a recording that comes in your inbox. Whatever email you registered with, you will see something tomorrow afternoon providing you with a thank you for attending, as well as the recorded webinar for you to share with any colleagues that you might think may be interested.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.